Welcome to the local perspective. Jerry Deshane with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. So you're not driving as much, which means gas tax revenues are down. Amazon is going by your house about every 15 minutes, so delivery traffic is up. The governor's introduced a budget bill. There's talk in Washington about a federal transportation bill. What is going on in transportation? I have no idea. So I brought in someone who knows. Wisconsin, one of our foremost voices in transportation, if you will, Debbie Jackson. Debbie is the executive director of the Transportation Development Association. Thanks for being with us, Debbie.
Thanks so much for having me.
Debbie and I first of all, we'll cue everybody in. Debbie and I are friends, so we are liable to get off topic or irreverent or something like that, but just work with us. Debbie, how long have you been with TDA?
I've been with TDA about 20 years, so a long time.
No way, really?
Really?
And I remember, oh boy, no, we're not going there because it'll date me.
Correct.
Not doing that.
Correct.
So, and describe for folks, our audience is generally local government people, also people who have an interest in local issues. What is TDA? Why does it exist? What does it do?
So TDA is a statewide alliance of about 400 stakeholders. We were founded in 1971. And we were really one of the first organizations of its kind because we brought all the players under one umbrella. So we have all the modes, and we have both users of the system, let's say like AAA Wisconsin representing motorists, the food processors, agribusiness, and then we have providers of the services, which could be a city, a village, a town, a county, a consulting engineer, a contractor, a labor union. And so we really bring together a diverse group of people. And I think what makes TDA unique and effective is that because we focus on really one issue, and that issue is a safe, modern, interconnected transportation system. So we're able to bring together these diverse partners and then focus long-term on issues, and I think that's really what you need to make progress. So if you look in the recent past, we did the constitutional amendment, and we kept together a group of partners for 6 years while we took the constitutional amendment to protect our transportation user fees all the way through a vote in 2014. Overwhelmingly, it passed. Most recently, we had a great group of partners. The League was one of them, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Towns Association, and so many more. And we worked on Just Fix It for 4+ years. And that was a campaign where we went out and we talked to Wisconsinites and local communities about the impact of our deteriorating transportation conditions on their daily lives, on their abilities to grow their communities. And we were able to raise the awareness of transportation and ultimately get some significant revenue in the 1921 budget, although perhaps not the long-term solution we were looking for. So I think TDA fills that role. We're really a coalition builder.
Are you, some people would look at that and say, okay, so that's a road advocacy organization. Is that how you describe yourself?
No, we're completely multimodal. And so again, we have transit agencies, we have the Bike Fed as a member, we have the ports, the railroads, and the whole group. And I think that's one of the things that makes us successful and makes us unique is we're not looking at it as at one mode at a time, which is I don't think how the average person thinks. I think they think of it as a system. And it's really about how do we move people and how do we move goods and how do we do that most efficiently, and that could depend on any number of factors. And so we need to have the whole kind of the whole array of transportation services. And so that's how we advocate.
Well, and speaking, taking off my interviewer hat here and speaking as a member, the conversations at TDA are about the whole system. It's about how does transit get workers to jobs? How do rails get products overseas and everything in between? Is there friction among the modes? There almost has to be because there's never enough money to go around. How do you as the executive director kind of walk that fine line?
Well, that is the interesting thing. So yes, if you look at what TDA focuses on, primarily we're focused on funding the entire system. So we're making a case to get sufficient funding to maintain and improve our system. And on policies, let's say, that go beyond one mode. But when it comes time to divide the pie, you're right. TDA has to remove its fingers, otherwise they could be lost.
They'd be cut off.
So again, we make a case for transportation, then every mode has to kind of make their case for their slice of the pie. But we often work with the various modes to help them make their case. And for modes that maybe don't get the amount of funding that they want, the response kind of is, let us help you make a better case. And we'll be happy to do that.
And by the way, she's working with the league right now on making those cases. We're going to talk about that before the end of the show. A lot of our audience are league members. They're city and village members, public works directors, mayors. You need their help.
Absolutely.
And we're in a state budget environment right now. You're looking for stories, right? Can you give us a quick overview of what you're looking for? We're going to talk more about it later.
Okay, well, what we found in Just Fix It is that facts are great, but what's even better is when communities tell their stories. When they make the case for why a specific transit investment is needed to make the connection you were talking about between an employer and some employees, or a road that leads into their industrial park that is hampering their ability to bring in another company. And so it's those specific stories. And so what we're asking is really related to a program that was in the 1921 budget, which was at that time referred to as the Multimodal Local Supplement Grant Program. And there were a bunch of great applications. The demand for that program was off the charts.
Yep.
I mean, $1.5 billion for 75 to 90 million, depending on iteration. After the veto was overturned, it became 90. Okay. But way off the charts. But when you actually mine those applications, you've got great stories, and it's so much opportunity. And so we're looking for your members to help us tell the story. First about grant applications that may have been accepted. Just got an email from Fort Atkinson, who had a grant that they received funding on, which was a roadway into their industrial park. And it's a great story to tell. Here's a project we can move forward with because we got this one-time funding, right? On the other side, you have other projects that were not selected. Well, these are still opportunities for us to make investments that can help those communities grow. And I think especially coming out of COVID, giving a shot in the arm, not to these local communities and helping their businesses grow is really important. And nobody tells the story better than your local officials.
So bookmark that. We're going to come back to it at the end of the show. If you applied for an MLS grant, and chances are you did, whether you received it or didn't receive it, we want to hear that story. Debbie, one of the reasons we have you on now, we're just starting the state budget process where they'll determine what the transportation budget looks like. There's also talk in Washington about a federal transportation, whether it's an emergency relief budget or a reauthorization budget. So I want to talk about that, but before we get there, what's on your mind most? What's the biggest challenge? What are the biggest opportunities?
The biggest challenge for us is maintaining and updating the transportation system that you and I and everybody watching relies on every day. So I think the health emergency last year really brought that to the forefront. Transportation was an essential service, and it was kind of the essential service that made all other essential services possible, right? You cannot move medical supplies and personnel without transportation. You cannot restock your grocery shelves without transportation, nor can you maintain the supply chains that got all the other goodies from Amazon that we think that we needed. And so transportation is one of those services that played a role last year during the health emergency and will play another role, an equally important role as we recover. The question is, how do we fund the maintenance and the upgrade of the system throughout all the levels? And I referenced the fact that we had some progress in the last budget with some significant revenue. And it was an essential first step. It was about $200+ million rolling forward. And it slowed the decline of our system conditions.
But it wasn't nearly enough.
It wasn't, that's the issue, is it wasn't nearly enough. So I think at this point, you know, we are in the middle of a 100-year pandemic. We have people who need to get employed. We have businesses that need to rebuild. We all have personal lives that we need to reconfigure. So I think it's understandable that right now, maybe the next step towards a longer-term sustainable solution for transportation isn't top of list. And we may get some help from the federal government. But I think we have to understand that we can't wait too long to bring that issue back to front and center, because we do rely on a couple of flat fees here in Wisconsin that are not indexed anymore to anything. So you're talking about the gas tax, you're talking about the vehicle and registration fee, vehicle registration and titling fee. And every year we lose purchasing power. It buys just a little bit less transportation, which I know your members are familiar with in many contexts. And I think, you know, GM recently announced that they are not going to build gas combustion engines after 2035.
Right.
It's a game changer.
Yep. And right now our system is built on what? 50% of it, the funding is gas tax?
50% gas, 50% of our state revenue is gas tax. It is also a huge player at the federal level. So again, we've been talking about, you know, the fuel efficiency of cars and the alternately fueled cars for a long time, and the need to come up with another user fee other than how we power our vehicles for decades. Well, now it's a little closer, so it has to be moved up a little sooner. And you say 2035, and you say, well, that's 15 years from now. Oh, but we don't have that. I don't think we have that much time, because we're going to see the fuel efficiency really start to crank up, I think. And you're going to see a whole lot more electric vehicles on the market. And as you see here in the state, which we'll talk about, and then also at the federal level, a big push to move our vehicles to electric. So,
what are the alternatives then? If you can't fund with a gas tax, there's a limit to how much you can put on a registration fee, I would think. What are the other options? I mean, what are the blue sky options?
Well, I think the option that's been out there for a long time that people automatically kind of raise their back up is the VMT, which is now also being called, which is vehicle miles traveled, which is also being called now the road user charge. And I think, you know, the concern typically has been the privacy issue. I have every faith that we could get beyond that. Again, the privacy issue really is no more than what your Google phone knows about you, right? So when people started breaking the safer...
As my face goes...
Correct. Well, remember, the first indication we got that people had broken the safer at home orders was really Google and Apple being able to track where you were with your phone. So they knew about mid-April of last year that people had they were kind of done with these safer at home as they were breaking it. So I think one of the items that's out there that would be an option is a road user charge or a vehicle miles traveled. I think that, you know, Secretary Buttigieg recently mentioned it as a federal option, and that may be one where we need federal leadership.
Wouldn't that be a VMT? Wouldn't that be a whole lot less expensive to implement than, say, tolling? I mean, you hear tolling talked about, and tolling is an imperfect solution as well.
I don't know that we've ever really studied in any significant way VMT in a large scale. We've had some tests. We've had a lot of tests in Oregon. And I think there might be a national pilot coming up, and there's some talks about let's implement it first with truckers, which may be a very rational way to test it. But I think that there will be ways for us to implement it in a way that is cost effective. I think the other great thing about VMT is I think you might have the option, just blue sky, picking out, if I could design my own system, could I charge a different rate for an interstate versus a town road versus a city road? May I then be able to tie back who gets the money based on where the money was actually generated? Could I then time differentiate it, right? You want to drive at rush hour, it's a little bit more than if you drive at 10:30 in the morning. So again, you could maybe put some of the congestion pricing in. So again, these are just blue sky ideas, but I think that it is time now for us to kind of start blue skying it so that we can get down to the finer discussions of options. There are other options that we could look at. I mean, you can always look at moving away from a user fee system, which again would not be something that I necessarily think would be a good idea, to put us all in the same fund battling for the same dollars as education and healthcare and the rest. I think the user fee system has served us well.
Well, and I think, don't people in Wisconsin and even nationally sort of expect their transportation dollars to be segregated, and that we fund transportation from a different place? Don't we look at it differently?
I think historically we have. Unfortunately, I think there's been a lot of cases in which we've kind of broke that. In Wisconsin, I think we broke that trust for a while when we were taking revenue out of the transportation fund and putting it in the general fund. At the federal level, I think we're kind of breaking it, because I think a huge amount that's currently being spent on surface transportation revenue is actually coming out of the general fund. But that usually happens because people don't make the choice to increase the user fee, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They want to take the least painful option.
Correct.
My guest is Debbie Jackson, the Executive Director of the Transportation Development Association. It's hard to say on one lungful.
Yeah.
This is the local perspective, in case you kind of jumped into the middle of our conversation. And we're talking about transportation. Debbie, we always kind of get fixated on the road system, and of course that's what most of us are familiar with. How is the rest of the system, rails, harbors, buses, pedestrian, bicycle, how would you rate that system in Wisconsin, and what are the challenges there? Are they the same? Are they different?
They are different because they all come with different funding sources, right? So if you're looking at the transit systems, do have a significant amount of funding out of the state transportation fund, but a lot of that is funded locally. And local revenue challenges as far as transportation goes are, quite honestly, as long-standing as state funding challenges. We're at least consistent.
They're called levy limits, and don't
Correct.
even get us started there. But
correct. But again, we don't have a lot of great options for funding transportation at a local level either. So I think if you're talking to transit groups, there are concerns about, how do I replace old buses, right? How do I pay for the operations of this system? And they have unique challenges during COVID, but they have ongoing challenges as far as that goes. And so I think that transit long-term has we need to build a coalition, and we need to explain transit better to people across the state. Transit is not a social program. It does help a lot of people who maybe need a helping hand, but it also moves a lot of people to their jobs,
which is
to their doctors, to the library, to any number of places, and we need to better explain that.
So if you want your economic system to work, if you want shopping to be viable, local economies to be viable, you need a transit system, period.
Correct. And as you pointed out, we are aging, right? So we're getting older.
Did I point that out?
Well, I'm sorry. Okay, maybe it was the breathing thing. I don't know. But we are getting older, right? So,
right.
Handling larger numbers of people who choose not to drive at some point in their lives is going to be something that we're going to need to address.
There's a lot of debate that what's going to happen after the pandemic with transit. obviously transit ridership went down dramatically. I mean, just catastrophically for transit systems. I believe nationwide we're up about 50% of what it used to be, so about half. Do you see that coming back in Wisconsin? Will it come all the way back? Will it come back and beyond? I mean, what's your prediction?
You know, that now you're asking me to read the tea leaves. If you believe that Wisconsin's economy is going to come back, which I do, I believe transportation activity will come back as well, because the two are inherently linked, right?
Sure.
May it take 3, 4, 5 years for it to come back? Maybe. It may not be a quick turnaround, but to be honest, after the Great Recession, it took VMT 7 years to get back to up there. So let's not hold them to a different, standard. So I do think it will come back, and I also think Wisconsin is investing in some unique some new transportation options for Wisconsin. You have BRT starting up in Milwaukee. They're going to
Bus rapid transit.
Bus rapid transit.
I always have to keep
Correct.
a glossary of
Correct.
my acronyms.
I should not use those terms. So I think that's scheduled to come on in, I think, 22. Again, and it runs parallel to the I-94 East-West corridor, where we're trying to get that next stage of the Southeast Freeway reconstruction enumerated. So there's some great investments going on in Milwaukee. Madison is looking at bus rapid transit as well along East Wash, and for those who are not familiar, that's the main drag coming from the east into downtown. And that could be a game changer, because one of the things that you have, I live in Sun Prairie, so this is so where we're filming today is really close to where I live. But if you currently, if you want to look at transit, until they did an express route from Sun Prairie, it was a really long haul because you had a lot of stops. And one of the things that we know about transit is that people want the most direct route. They don't want to do transfers. They're confused by bus schedules. You don't want to get on a bus and end up on, at the West Town Mall or something on the way to downtown.
I thought I was going that
Correct,
way.
4 hours later, right? And so I think, Madison is making progress, Milwaukee is trying this stuff, and I think that could really be interesting to see. So,
Debbie, and I've got to be careful here because I know we're going to run out of time before I want to. We've talked about challenges. What are some cool things that could be happening? What are the opportunities?
Okay, I have 2 opportunities for you, Jerry, and they're not dissimilar from where we discussed. So opportunities are, we step forward and we adopt and embrace technology, from electric vehicles to autonomous vehicles to micro-mobility, right? So
is that moving little small objects, or what are you talking about?
Micro-mobility is kind of looking at an Uber app, right? So I can get on my phone right now and ask for a car to come pick me up and take me home. How could technology like that be used in transit, right? How could you marry bus with bike sharing, with scooter sharing, and kind of make it an all one payment? So when I got on my, let's say I got in my, I got on my route here in Sun Prairie and I took the bus down to town, and with the same payment application, could I go up to the bike sharing program because I need to do a lunch meeting, but I don't have my car, and literally get a bike and go to the meeting? And how are we looking at this all together? And there are transit agencies that are, quite honestly, are coordinating with Uber or Lyft and not seeing them as much as a competition, but trying to figure out how to exist within the same world.
So sort of the future is not only multimodal, but it's also public-private.
I think so.
It's
Correct.
a blend of the two.
Correct. And that was my second opportunity, which is truly embrace multimodalism, okay? Let's stop talking about whether somebody is a cyclist or a commuter that way, or whether they're a car owner, or whether they're a public transit user. I rode my bike to work yesterday. I took my car today. Next week, I may get on the bus. It's all of those things. And as a company, I'm not looking for a place where I can move my product via truck, but not rail, and not water. And I don't, you know what I mean? I'm looking for, most people are looking for the complementary package of all of those items. And so we really should embrace that. Wisconsin is really an incredible position to, if we really embrace multimodalism, to make it a selling point for us. I mean, we actually have water transportation on two sides. We have the start of a beautiful, bike trail system, which people do use to commute. Let's finish it up. Let's, figure out how that works with all the other systems, and let's really make the movement of people and goods seamless.
Before, I want to turn around and go back to the local stories that we need. But before I do, real quickly, the current state budget on transportation, you don't view anything dramatic happening in this budget process, do you? Or will we kind of do a status quo thing?
What the governor's proposed at this point pretty much holds us at 1921 levels overall. There are some strategic investments, but overall it's pretty much held harmless. And I guess in a lot of ways, Jerry, I would say that that is a lot better than I feared, and many of us feared, let's say, last March and April when we saw traffic down 40 to 50%. Do I see that going up coming out of the legislature? I think that would be tough. I really do. I think we do have opportunities where we could see an infusion of investment on the federal side, but I'm not sure that I see it at the state side at this point. That doesn't mean that we're not continuing to make the case to explain why transportation investment is vital to our recovery and our ongoing economy. Doesn't mean that we're not putting a reminder card out there saying we didn't fix the problem last time. We'll see you, you haven't gotten rid of us yet, but I'm not sure I see it in this budget.
Okay, but speaking of this budget, it is going to be an all hands on deck to, frankly, stay at status quo. So once again, how can the people watching this help you?
Well, I think that, first of all, follow what the league's got out there. TDA's publications are all online. Follow us. I think you communicate with your legislators. I think you tell them how important it is. There's some specific investments in this budget as proposed by the governor that I think are important to you. 2% annual increase in GTA. I think that's a big deal for you guys.
That is a big deal.
2.5% increase for mass transit aids, $10 million a year in capital assistance for transit. And then we've got, the governor has proposed the second round, or another round, of the local grant program, the Multimodal Local Supplement Grant Program. And I would tell your representatives that these things are important to you, and that it is important that we at least maintain our progress from the 1921 budget, because that gives us a platform on which to build. To build to the next one. So we don't have our system conditions start to deteriorate back, let's say, at the rate at which they were doing prior to that budget.
We're going to have to leave it there. Debbie, join me again sometime this year. And once we've seen what the feds are doing and what they're doing at the Capitol in Madison. Debbie Jackson, Transportation Development Association Executive Director, been talking about the transportation system in Wisconsin and what part you can play in that system. Thanks for joining us on The Local Perspective. I want to thank the Wisconsin Community Media Group for helping spread the word, especially Mara and the team here at KSUN in Sun Prairie for doing a great job with the cameras, making me look good. I'm Jerry Deshane with The Local Perspective. Have a great day.